This is KUTV News, Channel 2, Salt Lake City, Utah.
Good evening, I'm Michelle King.
And I'm Bob Evans. Tonight, sources in Washington say the Bush administration might postpone the June superpower summit if the Soviet Union cracks down on Lithuania. The Soviets have gone beyond just flexing their muscles, and so far the U.S. has refrained from criticizing Soviet actions in the Baltic. But demonstrators here in Utah and elsewhere aren't walking as softly. There are about 50 Lithuanian Americans living in Salt Lake City. They marched at the Capitol today in support of their friends back home.
We came here today to express our solidarity with Lithuanian people, with our brothers and sisters, and with our mothers that we have in Lithuania.
More than 1,000 Lithuanian Americans demonstrated in Washington today. They hope President Bush will recognize Lithuania as independent and pressure Mikhail Gorbachev to do the same. But in Vilnius, Soviet paratroopers today seized the Communist Party headquarters. Reform communists who were barred from their offices were furious. One tore up his party membership. Early this morning, Russian soldiers raided this hospital to seize Lithuanian deserters from the Soviet army. Most of them escaped. Those who didn't were beaten before being led away. These pictures were taken just hours before the military raid. Response from the Bush administration is deep concern, but no condemnation. But the Senate passed a resolution condemning the Soviets for aggression in Lithuania, a resolution Soviet spokesmen don't like.
I must emphasize the unacceptable tone of ultimatum of some of the resolutions.
Both the U.S. and Soviet Union are being careful not to unravel the ties that have begun to bind the two countries.
I think that the administration has to continue to encourage Gorbachev. Perestroika and glasnost are very important.
Washington sources also say another possible reaction to Soviet aggression in Lithuania would be to delay the signing of treaties or to suspend trade talks. But, say the sources, we don't want to do something that would punish us as much as the Russians.
Shelly Thomas, Bruce Lindsay, and Bob Welty.
Good evening once again. I'm Shelly Thomas.
And I'm Bruce Lindsay. Lithuania's president is charging the Kremlin today with inexcusable aggression. The tough words come after early morning raids by Soviet troops on 2 Lithuanian hospitals where the soldiers seized 23 Red Army deserters. In another morning strike, Soviet troops took over the main office of the Communist Party. The president of Lithuania says Soviet troops have kidnapped his country's citizens and he's demanding their return. The Soviet Union defends its actions, and it took the unusual step of holding a news conference today in Washington. The deputy Soviet ambassador to the U.S. said the raid on Lithuanian deserters did not include military force. The ambassador said his country was simply exercising discipline over its troops. He said the Soviet Union is seeking a peaceful solution to the crisis that began when Lithuanians declared their independence. Shelley?
The White House is stopping short of criticizing today's Soviet Army action. Spokesman Marlon Fitzwater says the U.S. does not want to inflame the situation. Fitzwater refused to say whether the Soviet seizure of deserters constitutes force or intimidation. While the U.S. hopes for a speedy resolution to the crisis, he said it is still the Soviet Union's problem. He added that U.S.-Soviet relations are at stake and now is not the time to rock the boat. Thousands of Lithuanians rallied in support of the Soviet Union today. The demonstrators are against Lithuania's declaration of independence. This rally lasted less than an hour and remained peaceful. But to be on the safe side, authorities had rolled out fire hoses to repel any violence. As we told you at 6 o'clock, Lithuanians rallied here in Salt Lake City today. And in a few minutes, we'll talk with a Lithuanian refugee who took part in that rally for independence. She'll tell us about her life as a political activist in her homeland and about her arrest by the KGB. The Kremlin says it has not and will not use force to quell the unrest in Lithuania, but early this morning, Soviet paratroopers made raids on 2 Lithuanian hospitals where they seized 23 Red Army deserters. In another morning strike, Soviet troops took over the main office of the Communist Party. The president of Lithuania says Soviet troops have kidnapped his country's citizens, and he demands their return. He says the Kremlin used inexcusable aggression.
The Bush administration is pulling back from any confrontation over Lithuania. It's concerned but refuses to condemn. But complicating the U.S. position is a statement last weekend from Vice President Quayle, who seemed to be defending the Soviet roundup of Lithuanian deserters. There's a certain element of discipline, he said, that is absolutely imperative to any armed forces. There's an obligation they want fulfilled. The vice president's office today said he didn't mean to support the violent roundup, but the Soviets are already quoting Quayle to justify their moves.
During the past few years, dozens of Lithuanians have fled their country and made their new homes here in Utah. Today, many of them demonstrated at the state capitol to show their support for their homeland. News specialist Dwayne Cardall has that story.
The majority of people think that Lithuania is part of Russia. Well, it's not.
Virginia Shabonis wants Americans to know her people want freedom. To make her point, she and others marched at the state capitol today.
I want all people in all world, not in Utah or in the United States, to recognize Lithuania as independent country and to talk about Lithuania as independent country, not as part of Russia.
Virginia, her husband, and 2 children fled their country last year after being persecuted by the government for their beliefs and political activism. In 1988, she says she was jailed for 5 days after participating in a pro-independence rally.
We had 3 times searches made in our house, and last time when, KGB made search in our house, they told that I have to prepare food for my husband, that he will go to Siberia.
Instead of Siberia, the Shabonises immigrated to America, but they are still working for Lithuanian independence. While she marched here in Utah, her husband joined other refugees in Washington to push for U.S. recognition of Lithuania.
I think everyone wants to be free, and no one likes to be occupied.
They may not be in Lithuania during these days of momentous change, but today they found solidarity with their homeland as they stood on the steps of the state capitol and sang their country's national anthem. Dwayne Cardall, Eyewitness News, Salt Lake City.